The crisis at Eskom is expected to feature prominently in Minister Mboweni's budget speech in Parliament this afternoon. Eskom's problems top a list of crucial matters that must be addressed. South Africa is struggling to hold on to its only remaining investment-grade credit rating. The minister will also outline ways of reducing government spending, and the public sector wage bill could be in the firing line. Mboweni is also expected to provide more details on the proposed State Bank and Sovereign Wealth Fund. Public sector union NEHAO has threatened to shut down government indefinitely if Finance Minister Mboweni announces a freeze in public sector wages during his budget speech. NEHAO says such an announcement would be tantamount to a declaration of war. The union says government wants to renege on a 3-year public sector wage deal struck in 2018 and not pay public servants the agreed increased pay for the final year, which begins in April 2020. The union says such a move would be a declaration of war. Public sector wages have been rising quickly at a time of severe fiscal constraints. They now account for around a third of consolidated government expenditure. Let's find out what to expect this afternoon. We cross to our anchor, Nompumelelo Siziba, in Parliament. Very good afternoon to Nompumelelo. You've been canvassing the views of economists outside there in the parliamentary precinct. What are you hearing ahead of the budget?
Thanks very much, Nzinga. Well, what I'm hearing is that it's going to be a very tough budget for the Finance Minister, Mboweni, in the sense that he's got to make some cuts, expenditure cuts, and he also needs to raise revenue as well to try and fund some of the priorities of the country. In terms of raising revenue, there's a suspicion that he'll, tinker with the usual taxes, your sin taxes, tobacco taxes, your road levy and fuel levies and so on. And of course, people have raised the possibility of a VAT increase. There was a lot of controversy when that happened a couple of years ago. But will he go there? One analyst that we spoke to earlier said that if he goes there, it really shows the very tricky situation that government is in. So, of course, we just need to wait and see what he does. Whatever he does is going to be a pain for us as taxpayers, because we're the ones who are going to be feeling the brunt. We're the ones who are subjected to lower wage increases currently, higher prices in the shop. As much as Stats SA tells us that inflation is fairly benign, my inflation is not the same inflation as the next person's inflation, and so on. So very tricky indeed. So the expectation is that it's going to be a tough one. And of course, we want to hear details, as you mentioned, around that Sovereign Wealth Fund. Analysts saying that they don't believe that we have the wherewithal right now to be able to create something like that when we are in deficits left and right, current account deficit, budget deficit, and so on and so forth, and it's going to be a struggle anyway to raise taxes as well, just for our basic priorities. But of course, one of the issues that will be uppermost in our minds is the issue of energy. We need energy to power the economy, and as we all know, that's a bit of a tricky situation right now, as we're exposed to about another 18 months of load shedding. According to the Minister of Energy and Minerals, that could even be 2 years, 24 months. So not a great situation indeed. I do have an economist who specializes in the energy sector, who has views on what can be done in the energy sector and why it's so important. That is Kenneth Creamer. He's an economist lecturer at Wits University, and he joins me now. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. So the energy crisis is very real, having economic impacts. What are your thoughts as it relates to what will come out of the budget?
Yes, well, thank you for that. There was a recent report by the CSIR which put some numbers to what you've been saying, that the cost of the energy crisis in 2019 went to over 140 billion rand to the economy in lost production. And that doesn't include all the other kind of effects that has in falling jobs, falling investment, just lost production. And 2019 was in fact the very worst year that South Africa has ever had in terms of that energy shortage and the cost to the economy. And they've projected that it could well get worse in the years ahead. So I would like to say that a very important message from this budget is to look at infrastructure spending in general, and in particular that we get the right signalling regarding our energy crisis.
How haven't we been getting that right signalling? I mean, in the State of the Nation address, the President did speak about expediting licenses for companies that want to produce more than 1 megawatt of power to 120 days. That's still quite a number of months. But still, we're getting timelines. Even the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy also speaking to the same thing, that people can produce energy without even a license if they're producing less than 1 megawatt and so on and so forth. Aren't they making the right noises? And if they are, what is the problem?
Yes, I think you're quite right. There has been some very, very clear signalling from the President in the State of the Nation address, followed by the Minister of Minerals and Energy, indicating that government has understood that this is the major constraint facing our economy. The IRP 2019, that's the Integrated Resources Plan 2019, was announced late last year. And now we're sitting in February, March, April. We need to see it starting to be implemented. That is the key thing. Implementation, it's time for words must be now replaced by actual deeds. South Africa can't afford to have a long series of delays. At the moment, it seems to be working on 2 tracks. The one track is the implementation of the IRP, that is putting out to tender new renewables, new gas, new hydro, new coal projects, and that hasn't been done yet. We're waiting for that to be done months after the IRP was announced. That's hence my urgency in that area. And then the other track is later in December last year, they said there'll be some kind of emergency measures taken as well. So those two mustn't delay each other. They must run in parallel. We can't wait for one or the other. We kind of have to walk forward on 2 legs to begin to address the energy crisis.
In the interim, of course, whilst we wait for these energy projects to come online, we have the situation where we continually are exposed to load shedding. One of the small business fraternity people that I spoke to earlier was suggesting that perhaps it would be a good idea for the finance minister to give incentives to small, medium enterprises who are perhaps having to buy generators or invest in solar energy. Do you think that would go some way in enabling them to do their business and maybe employ 1 or 2 people while we have this difficulty?
Look, I haven't really thought about that. It does seem to make sense what you're saying. I've been more concerned about the macro scale responses to what is a really major problem. We are producing less and less electricity in this country. In the broader picture, I'd like the budget to be addressing infrastructure in general. If you look closely at the budget over the last few years, because of a combination of rising wages and expenditure cap and also the state-owned companies needing bailouts continually, the amount of money that we're putting into infrastructure has been falling. And it could be school infrastructure, hospital infrastructure, or energy infrastructure, or transport infrastructure. So it's a generalized problem that we're hoping that we can start to turn around, because we can't run our infrastructure down in this country over such a long period without serious consequences for poverty and inequality and job creation. So it would be good to signal that we will allow, through a re-regulation of, for example, energy, private sector activity in a very regulated way, like they bid for production of electricity, or companies say we will produce 75 megawatts. That will help us to get again to have both the public and the private sectors working in tandem. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand for investment in this country. There's just a lack of regulation, a lack of confidence. President Ramaphosa has had major investment summits which have been relatively well attended. A lot of good things have been said. If you looked at the data out of Stats SA coming out last year, we have had an increase in private sector investment in the economy, and but it's not enough. We need to really rapidly, and it's pent up. If you do an analysis, we could quite rapidly increase our investment through the right regulation.
I like the sound of your energy there and your enthusiasm. So Nzinga, what Kenneth is basically saying is that we've got great ideas, great plans. This conversation is the usual one, but we need implementation. Is the finance minister going to be talking about money on the table that enables these projects to be implemented? Because of course without energy we can't power the economy, and of course that has all sorts of consequences which we've discussed earlier. It's back to you in studio, Nzinga.
My colleague Nompumelelo Siziba in Parliament, there outside Parliament, waiting for that budget speech to be delivered by Finance Minister Mboweni in about 50 minutes. We